So I'm Scott Francis, CEO and co-founder of BP3. I've got Ivan Kornienko with us, who's our director of UX at BP3, and together we're here to show you Brazos CX Insights. Won't be any surprise, but I'm not upset about how the Forrester Wave for BPM service providers turned out. This is our shameless plug. The other thing I'd point out, though, is these providers on the Wave are the people that I think are going to deliver on the promise of digital transformation. Who else is going to make sense out of all the blockchain and machine learning stuff out there? Brazos is also our, this is kind of our secret sauce, right, for how we do better UI user experiences for process applications. And it starts with developers and works up the chain in terms of how we get adoption. All of us in the room, to some degree or another, do process improvement. As a services firm, we have access to great process mining tools, simulation tools, analytics, et cetera, from many vendors in this room, but we can't be experts in it all. And that's part of why we developed Brazos, to make it more accessible for a typical BPM developer to deliver great user experiences for their process applications. But we're getting into new use cases, so bear with me while I go through a couple examples. In particular, our clients are Global 500 customers in general. They have UI teams, they have process improvement teams, they have massive rollouts across geographies in many languages and locales. They don't necessarily have the tools to help them understand how their user interfaces in their processes are being used by their end users. So a pharma rollout for clinical trials, for example. We need good UX because it affects error rates and performance in the studies that they do. It actually also affects survival rates and lives down the road. So the first challenge is to address all the device types, make sure that we don't have a bad user experience on any of them. But we also have challenges in terms of localization. We need ways to process data in different languages and bring that back in. And we need to make sure that those issues don't manifest as sort of bad user experiences that cause higher error rates. Even in English, we find ourselves sort of separated by a common language. Different interpretations of the same words lead to different answers on the forms. That makes a difference when you're doing clinical trials. Now, on the other hand, we also roll out global applications for financial firms, for major banks. And of course, the processes also have local variation, right? Different countries have different rules. We have all the same localization issues around language and currency and formatting of calendars and things like that. But we also have fun things to deal with, like the regulations. What questions we can ask are different. The answers we can expect to get from customers are different in different countries. I'm experiencing that myself as we expand into other geographies and have to answer interesting questions for banks. And there are good UI tools for these things, right? There's Optimizely, Google Analytics. You can get an understanding of how your web applications are being used by users and sort of end or consumer use cases, but they don't really understand process context. So there's kind of a piece missing, right? I can do my process improvement and I can understand my user experience, but I can't really connect the two very easily, which can be a little bit frustrating, right? If you are someone trying to do this kind of analysis, I think you'll feel about like he does. Missing out on this huge opportunity for improvement. I can't connect the data I'm getting about my users with the data I'm getting from my process. It's a little frustrating, as you can see. I'm missing out on, also UI considerations, right, are kind of left out of the process improvement handbook and vice versa. So you get a little bit of issues like that. And I think there's a different approach, the happy path, if you will. Combine the perspectives of these two approaches by giving you user experience analytics accessible to your process context and your typical BPM developer. Taking it as an example from a geographic perspective, I can do analysis on how my user experience is in different geographies, whether the error rates are different, similar, are they spending more time than we expect in different places. I can also leverage heat mapping to get at more specific issues, right? A specific form, a specific field that's causing problems in my process, causing me to receive bad data, or causing issues for users to abandonment, et cetera. And we can get into 3 different heat maps for the same application, but sliced along different demographics, and then figure out why are these different demographics experiencing different results in the same user interface, right? It's the same UI. Why don't they experience it the same way? Well, we can find out. Our solution to that is Brazos CX Insights. It is how we track and analyze Brazos usage for iterative UI improvement, and it's how we unlock the benefits of a better understanding of how your UI is used by real users. We license it with Brazos and typically alongside a services engagement because, let's face it, our typical BPM developer is not also a good UI analyst, but we do work with global firms that have literally whole teams focused on user experience, right? So we do get some benefit from that. And yeah, the surprise puppy. It's like, oh, well, we're done. Time for the demo. Ivan,
Alrighty, thanks.
turn it over to you.
Now, we believe in a delightful user experience, both for the developers and for the end users. Really, this tool allows us to continuously measure that end user experience, learn from what makes users unhappy, and iterate until a completely frictionless experience can actually be created. So here we're looking at a form. It is an IBM BPM. It's also built with Brazos, just a standard form. All right. Okay, so as a user, using an interface such as this interface can be part of a process. It could just be a dashboard outside of a process, but a number of things define my, my experience when interacting with this particular form. So the first thing we saw there is overall page load time. So that's a very basic metric. How long did it take for the actual screen to pop up? Obviously, long times would make it frustrating. From here, I'd go and start filling this out. I already filled out this form a little bit just so I don't have to bore you with all the fields. But as I progress down here, I'm going to have simple inputs. I'm also going to have different inputs that are actually powered by asynchronous calls. In IBM BPM, these are called boundary events. So that's kind of the language that's used for them throughout. But they are basically data that's retrieved asynchronously on the interface. So it might be things that are simple, maybe things that are a little more complicated, where I potentially input a single field and then a bunch of data gets retrieved. The reason why this is important from a UX perspective is depending on the integrations that are driving this, it could potentially lead to slow load times. It could lead to a degraded user experience where the user is sitting there just waiting for these things to occur. So progress down this form. I have a couple other fields. I'm going to get into maybe a table down here. Inside this table, we have drivers for this particular underwrite policy application. Inside of this, I have a driver's license number, which I can go ahead and populate. Also have a few other fields, but basically, as I work through this, certain things are going to be clear. Certain things are going to be just plain in terms of what I actually have to put in there. Other things are going to be not so clear. So, for example, I get down here, I have this US DOT number. Maybe there's actually a few different types of numbers that may be based on it. So I might put in a single format, click done, and then inevitably go ahead and try completing it, and I get a validation error. So I'll get something back to me stating that perhaps I didn't fill up the form correctly, or maybe certain fields are missing here. So I'll have to go in here and fill out some of these fields. Go down here, I have another validation error over here. Looks like it's the DOT number, so it says invalid DOT number. So maybe I'd try a different format that I know is valid from a DOT number perspective. Go ahead and submit it. I inevitably get another validation error. So really the thing here is there is a lot of process that actually occurs inside of one of these interfaces. It's not necessarily straight through top to bottom, and the more complex the screen gets and the more varied your user base is, there's a lot of different ways that they may proceed through that interface. And of course, not all of those are going to be the optimal way of doing it. So then finally, I maybe figure out the right format for it, and I go ahead and click submit, and everything ends, and that's good. So, so really, typical process analysis, we really just know how long it took for the task to complete, and we know which data came out of it. But even as you saw in that fairly simple interface, there's a lot of interactions that could potentially lead to a poor user experience. So there's the screen structure, certain field masking. You could be optimizing integration performance to actually improve that interface. So lots of things there that were could lead to a poor user experience, which if you knew that these were issues, that you could actually improve iteratively. So this is where CX Insights comes in. So we'll start with an analysis, and I'll enable this. I'll put this into analysis mode and rerun that same interface. So typical analysis, the actual runtime would occur inside of your, obviously in a production system. As far as the analysis could actually be done in a completely separate environment, because the data that is powered this is shared across environments, but it can be viewed from any one of them. So I'll change this to the last 7 days. which have about 800 runs here. This is using a big data backend, so it scales to thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000s. That's fine. I might also cut this down to a specific subset of users. So I might say, okay, I'm just going to analyze this guy, and I might cut it down to a specific environment or a specific screen resolution, right, depending on what my analysis might be. In terms of the actual analysis, what I can learn here is how the interface was used and what was actually used on the interface. So first of all, from a usage perspective, I can understand which parts of the screens are used and which parts are not used in the subset of data that I'm currently looking at. I can also learn which duration, so how long are people spending on each part of the screen. As we can see, actually the longest amount was spent on the driver section, which makes sense. It's more of a complex field, which has a table, and there's a modal, and there's quite a bit of data in there. So I can look at it both as a roll-up, so I see general statistics about how long each one of these screens actually takes, and what are all the different sessions that used that particular that particular container here. Or I can actually start drilling down into the individual fields and get a feel for which specific fields are being used on your interface and which fields are actually not being used on that screen. So usage duration, so which are used, which are not used. Usage duration is how long do people spend on some of these screens, so on some of these fields and some of these components. So in many cases, a field may not make sense, so a user has to reach out to a coworker, maybe a user has to flip into a different system to find the data, so it would identify where on the interface that people are actually getting stuck. We can also look at it from an error perspective, because while validation errors and error catching, it's great, but really when we've presented a user with a validation error, we've already failed because the user has already spent the time entering the data incorrectly. So as the BPM program, as BPM practitioners, we need to be able to go back and understand which are the core failure modes in the interface, and then go back and actually improve those fields by adding field masks, by adding comments, by adding anything else that would actually tell the people how to fix that. So here we see the different errors. Here's the error that I received across that first field there, the name field. I also get all the specific sessions that make up that error. So I get a good idea there. Same thing for boundary events. So again, boundary events are simply AJAX actions. It's just the IBM name for them. But these AJAX actions are, again, another big problem for end users. If you have complex integrations, if you have maybe the screen doesn't take a lot of time to show up, but if you have very large systems that are being accessed with certain data scenarios, you might encounter very slow load times depending on the payload that's actually being retrieved there. So let's take a look at one of these errors. I'm actually going to look at the error inside of the table, which is this one right here. So I'm going to go inside of the table. This is actually an interesting one for us because we have, so out of 141 runs, look like 115 of them, this error occurred, and it actually occurred 204 times. So this error occurred multiple times, meaning that the people got, they entered it, they got an error, they entered it again, they got an error. So it identifies something that's clearly a pain point, that's something that becomes a problem for end users. So we dig in here, we can start looking at this particular error over that USDOT number, so invalid USDOT number. And really the next step we take here is we can actually step into a representative session to understand, well, what did this interaction actually look like? Why did this occur for the person, and why are we seeing such problems with the actual data? So go to a timeline here. So this is a timeline representation of the session. So in this case, the session was about 5 minutes long. That's how long it took the user to actually populate this entire interface. And this is all the different points represent, obviously, different points in time, different interactions with different sections inside of that. I could potentially dig into each one of them, maybe expand them out to see details within. But the one that's of interest to us is this error one. So the error was inside of drivers, so I can open that up, open up my table. There's that row number 1 where that error occurred, and here's that invalid DOT number. So based on this visualization, what I can actually understand is that this error occurred 3 times. So the user entered this 3 times. They entered it the first time at 3 minutes 52 seconds, then at 5:20, and then at 5:35. Fix that. So here I get a much better understanding for where is this error actually occurring. So likewise from boundary event perspective or just interacting with fields perspective, I can get a much better understanding for where that problem occurs. So now user tracking tools like this, they've been around for a while, and really all product organizations use tools similar to this, things like Google Analytics. There's quite a few different ones out there. Certainly Google has, if you look at Google Docs, pretty much every click, every interaction, everything is orchestrated in terms of understanding how people interact with it. Now, seldom are any of these tools actually used in BPM programs. And the reason why they're not used in BPM programs is that because they do take quite a bit of time to actually configure them for the interfaces, to configure them for a specific form, and then to actually perform the analysis. So with CX Insights, we've actually completely eliminated that configuration. So for Brazos users, for all of our customers that use Brazos, enabling analysis such as this and a few things that I'm going to show you here, it's just a checkbox. It's basically you opt into the service and all of this is automatically tracked, and all of this is available both from a hierarchical analysis, from a session analysis, and a few other things here. So that's the big value add here, is that we're completely eliminating that configuration time for such a tool and making the use of something like this in a BPM project a complete non-brainer, absolutely doing that.
As a bonus, we can track your Facebook browsing history as well. You know, it's fine. It's just a free service, right?
Yeah. All right, so this is just a single session, and that's fine, but let's look at the bigger selection here. So I'll remove a few of these filters, and I'll look at about 500 sessions here. So now we're looking at across 500 total runs, which include 8 unique users across those 500 runs. Here's the average of what an average session looks like for any of them. So we can start doing some of that same analysis that we were looking at before on this scale as well. So if I look at a summary, I start getting an understanding of how often are each of these sections used or unused. So I can focus on the components that are used, parts of the screen that are used, and just get rid of the ones that are potentially not used altogether. The other way to look at this data is more from a top-down perspective here. I'm going to step into one of these here. So I'm looking at a specific project, and this is just a sample project that was created here. And with this sample project, we can look at not only a given interface, but we can start analyzing it across all the sessions that actually occurred. So one important element is a geographic element. So one of the customers that we're working with, as Scott alluded to, a pharma company. So in their perspective, they're deploying a global application to many different locales. And the whole application is going to be in English. It's not going to be translated just because of alignment with FDA regulations. But in their case, what becomes a bit problematic is whenever you expose something like this to non-English speakers, it's very difficult to tell which specific parts of the interface are going to be problematic and which are not. So in their case, as opposed to having to do send across worksheets and Word documents in order to do this upfront analysis, what they're doing is just deploying the application to those locales and just seeing what the testers, what some of the UAT, a very wide-ranging UAT, what feedbacks they actually come back to. So something like this, it would be impossible to do unless you had some sort of automated tracking telling you how long are people spending on each screen, what type of errors are they getting, what types of behaviors are those users actually exhibiting. Now, a big part here is also the process context. In our case, let me show you the process diagram here. Here's a process diagram, very simple, just 3 steps, just kept it very simple for the purpose of this. Just by CX Insights tracking each one of those interfaces, we get a process context for that application. And across that application, we can start understanding how those user experience KPIs look across that entire process. So the user experience KPIs here are the things that you're seeing in the list. So page load, events per run, boundary events. So how long do some of these AJAX events take, errors, time on task. So it does incorporate also some lightweight process analytics as well, because analyzing user experience, that's an important one as well. So how long does it take these tasks to complete? How long is the actual wait time before some of this work is picked up? But we can start looking at this data now holistically across the process. So we're not looking at just a one-off screen, which may represent something by itself, but we're looking at a given screen as part of an overall process. So for example, here we have an activity that actually had 2 screens inside of it, and the user would progress from a primary research screen to a secondary research screen through a variety of actions. So here we actually see that grouping, and we could do that. So last thing I wanted to show you here is what this exposes to us is A/B testing as well. So we can deploy multiple versions of the same application, of the same screen, of the same very, very large application potentially. Let's do this. And then across that, so here we're looking at 2 different snapshots. One of them is called unnamed, and the other one is 008. Here we're looking at a comparison across specific dates for when that application actually ran. And in this case, we could potentially filter it down to a given screen, so human service. Just this one right here is the one I care about, so I can filter it down to that one, or perhaps include other metrics, maybe about the executing user, or maybe about the screen size, any specific metric that I'm interested in. And then just across that data, start looking for how different was that interaction. So this exposes the A/B testing, and we can analyze it on a continuous manner, or we could do an average. So on an average 14th of the month, or on an average 6 o'clock, what did that interaction actually look like? So here we can test multiple versions of a given interface, multiple versions of a given process, figure out the differences, and then choose the one that performs the best, choose the ones that the users love, choose the one that takes the least amount of time for that activity to complete. So in all, this tool, and we're disconnected. Well, good thing that was done.
Right? Yeah.
Well, good thing that was done. But in all, the tool, it bridges together user tracking, process awareness, and the UI framework awareness, which in this case is Brazos. This makes tracking interfaces, this makes tracking user experience in a BPM solution easy to do because it doesn't take any time, hence something that we're starting to use with every single one of our BPM projects. And that's it.
Yeah, thanks.